Okay, let's imagine that you want to print something 10 times. So you print hello and you want to print hello 10 times. So the most obvious way to do that, for now with what you've learned, is to do exactly what I'm doing here, which is copy and pasting the same code 10 times. Then you run the code, so you can save the file loops.py, for example, and you can see that we have hello printed 10 times. So of course that works, but it is really far from being optimal. Writing the same code multiple times is not very efficient, and it is quite bad when you program. You should aim not to repeat yourself. And now imagine that, okay, here we are just printing hello 10 times, but imagine you want to print hello 1000 times or 10,000 times. Of course, you will not copy and paste that 1000 times. And that is why you are going to use loops. So a loop will be used to repeat a given block of code. So you only need to write the block of code once, and then it will be repeated as many times as it needs to. And there are two main ways to write loops, using the for loop and using the while loop. Here I'm going to show you how to use both, and let's start with the for loop. So I'm going to simply remove all of that, and I'm going to use a for loop here. So you can see this is a keyword in Python, and just let me write for I in range 0, 10, and print hello. So I'm going to explain that. I'm going to run it, and as you can see, we have hello printed 10 times. So with only 2 lines of code, you can execute this instruction 10 times or even 1000 times. Okay, here you have, as you can see, still continuing here, you have 1000 hello printed in your terminal. Let's go back to 10. So how is this working? So you have the for keyword, and then we have a variable named I. Okay, you can name it as, you can just put any name you want, but usually we are going to use I, okay, when we just want a number that we increment, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we are going to use the I variable. Okay, so this will create a local variable inside that for loop and for the following block of code, which has an indentation. And then you have the keyword in, okay, and finally a range. So you can use an array or a list. We are going to see that just in the next lesson. But for now, we are going to use range. So range 0, 10 means that it's a list starting at 0 and ending at 10 minus 1. So basically 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, and now what it will do, so don't forget here the column, what it will do is it will run the following block of code, okay, for every number in the range. So first it will run that block of code when I is equal to 0, then when I is equal to 1, when I is equal to 2, etc., until I is equal to 9, and finally after that it will exit and go to the next instruction in the main scope. So if I do print end here, if I run it again, you can see we have 10 times hello and then end. To see the actual number, okay, the actual incrementation every time with I, what you can do is just print I. So of course, because this is an integer, we need to use str, okay, to be able to concatenate 2 strings. Let's run the script, and here it may make more sense to you. Let's do that. You can see hello 0, hello 1, etc. until hello 9. Okay, so I will take a different value every time between the first number in the range and the last -1 number in the range. And here really pay attention to the indentation, okay, because if I add another piece of code here, it will be executed, as you can see, every time in the for loop but if I remove the indentation, it will not be executed in the for loop, it will be executed after the for loop, okay? So the indentation is super important when you work with Python. Okay, so that is how to use a for loop, okay, to repeat a given block of code multiple times. And now I'm going to actually use the while loop to do exactly the same. So I'm going to go here and comment those lines, okay, so we still have them. And I'm going to use the while loop. First of all, I'm going to create a I variable and set it to 0. And I'm going to use while, so the while keyword, and I'm going to write I is lower than 10. So while I is lower than 10, as you can see, we have a new block with a new indentation. I will print, so I can just copy that actually. I can print hello plus I, and then I'm going to do I is equal I plus 1. So let's just run that, and then I'm going to explain to you. So as you can see, the result is exactly the same. Okay, it's a totally different structure, but the result is the same. So what happened here? Well, the for loop will actually make this variable here, this new local variable, go into the range on the right and execute the block of code as many times as needed, depending on how big the range. With the while loop, it's different. The while loop will check the condition, okay? This is kind of a if, okay? If you remember what we did with conditions, we are testing a condition. So it's like, if this is true, then we execute that block of code. But it's more than an if, okay? It's not only if this is true, we execute that code and then we continue. It's as long as this is true, we continue to execute it, okay? So it is a if plus a loop. And the way to write a while loop like that usually is, for example, you have a counter. So because we don't create the counter variable like here in the for loop, we create directly with the for instructions. Here we need to create it before. So you create I counter and you initialize to 0, for example. And then you check while I is lower than 10. So you execute the following block of code with an indentation always. And then you are going to increment the counter. So the counter will be the same value plus 1, and you continue until the condition is false. And when the condition is false, then you go out of the loop. So how is it executed here? So first you go to line 4, I equals 0. You go to line 5, while I is lower than 10. So we are checking, is I lower than 10? So is 0 lower than 10? Yes. So we go inside the while and we print hello plus I, which is actually currently 0. Then we go to that line and here we increment I. So now I is not 0, I is 1. And as you can see here, we can actually modify the value of I. We are in a nested scope, okay? We have created I in a more global scope and we are modifying I in a more nested scope. So that is possible that way. After that, we don't go to line 8, we go back to line 5, okay? And while we'll continue to evaluate that. Now I is 1. So is 1 lower, strictly lower than 10? Yes. So we go to that block again and hello plus the new value of I, which is 1, and we have this line. And we continue, so I equals 2, etc., etc. And when we get to 9, so we add 1 to 8, I will become 9. We go there, we execute the code again, and then we will have I equal 10. We go back to line 5, and we have the condition is 10 strictly lower than 10, which is false. And in that case, we are going to break out of the while loop and continue to line 8. So here with the while loop, there is one important thing that you should pay attention to, is to not forget to actually increment the counter, okay? Because if you don't, okay, let's say I add a comment here. If you don't increment the counter, okay, the while loop will continue to run indefinitely. And you have what we call the infinite loop problem, okay, which is when you just are stuck in one loop and the program is stuck here and can't progress with the next instructions. So if we do that, I equals 0, we test, it's true, and then we continue and it's always true. So we are never going to break out of the while. So don't forget to increment the counter when you do such a thing. And here, this is just to make things easier. Instead of writing I equals I plus 1, what you can do is simply to write I plus equal 1. So when you do that, it means that the value on the right will simply be added to the variable. If I run it again, it's the same. Okay, great. Now you know how to use a for loop and a while loop to execute one piece of code multiple times. And now you may wonder, when should you use a while loop and when should you use a for loop? Because you can actually use both of them in many of the situations you will encounter. So the rule is basically use a while loop when you don't know how many times you need to execute the block of code. For example, if you read the temperature with a sensor and you need to keep executing an action while the temperature is below 10 degrees, then you need a while loop because you don't know how long it would take for the temperature to rise above 10 degrees. So you need to continue until the condition is temperature is greater than 10 is met. Now, if you need to read the temperature 1,000 times and you need to compute the average temperature, then you will use a for loop because you know exactly how many times you need to do the action. So basically, when you think, I have to run that code for as many times, use a for loop. When you think, I have to run that code until that condition is true or false, then use a while loop. So for the example we used here, you can clearly see that the for loop is more appropriate because we just wanted to print hello 10 times, that's it. So the for loop is better for this case. And later in this course, we are going to practice more with for and while loops for different purposes.